Alright, welcome to Operation End Times. It's October 8th, 2011. Today, I'm going to talk about what to believe. You know, in these end times, that's one of the biggest hurdles facing all of us, is what to believe. And it's really hard to figure out. You know, the easy answer is believe the truth. But what makes it difficult is it's really hard to determine what the truth is. And, you know, the Bible clearly states that in the end times there'll be great deception. And, you know, that's one of the things we kind of find is that evil, Satan, one of the things that they do to confuse and deceive those seeking the truth is they create a parallel concept that looks almost exactly like the truth, so that you can't tell them apart and tell which is the truth and which isn't. You know, it's kind of like, you know, there's Christ and then there's the Antichrist. And, you know, if you kind of look at what they say about the Christ or the Antichrist portrays himself to be Christ. But that kind of goes on all throughout the Bible. You know, there's a Trinity and then there's the false Trinity, you know. And, you know, even in the real world, you know, one of the things that Satan has been doing is trying to mirror image everything that God created. You know, God created man who was perfect. God created the whole world. Everything in it was perfect. But what we've done since then is try to make things better than God made things, you know, especially through genetic manipulation. You know, with our food that we eat, you know, we do genetic experiments on animals, trying to create better animals. You know, chickens have been genetically modified to produce more meat. But the reality is that this attempt to make things better, or an alternate version of something, is it's all fake. And in the long run, it doesn't work, because what God created was perfect. So whether it's medicine or genetically modified food or animals, in the long run you find out that there are defects, side effects, and in the long run it's not healthy. So that's a little bit of what we're facing, you know, when we're trying to figure out what to believe and what's the truth. So anyway, you know, one of the big concepts that's been floating out there in the last 30 days is that we're right at the start of the end times. And we had this astrological alignment on September 30th. And it was on one of the Jewish festivals, the Feast of Trumpets, but it appeared to be fulfillment of Revelations 12, where it said, "I saw a wondrous sign in the sky, a woman clothed in the sun with the moon at her feet giving birth." So a lot of people were looking at that astrological alignment and saying, man, that confirms it. We're entering the final week, the 70th week, the 7 years that are laid out in Revelations that some people call the tribulation. Even though what I'll tell you is that 7-year window, there's tribulation all through it, and there's even a portion of it where it becomes the Great Tribulation. But one of the other concepts that's been kind of tied to it is the rapture. And a lot of Christians out there kind of believe in what you call a pre-tribulation rapture. So they were kind of hanging their hats that they were going to be raptured sometime between, let's just say September 26th and yesterday, you know, Yom Kippur. And their whole idea was that God would never allow them to go through that 7-year period or tribulation, so he was going to whisk them out of the way. And I was kind of calling it Operation Sidestep. But, you know, if you're here today watching my video, you know there was no rapture. Operation Sidestep either never existed or was canceled. And, I was never a big believer in it anyway. I do believe there might be a rapture or a gathering up to Jesus either midway through the 70th week or at the end before God's wrath is poured out in his final judgment. That Christians, believers in Jesus, they don't have to go through God's wrath and his final judgment. But I do believe we have to go through at least a portion, if not the majority, of that 7-year period and the trials and tribulations associated with it, and also through the wrath of Satan, which will be aimed directly at Christians. So for all the people that were believing in the pre-trib rapture, today they got to be sitting there saying, man, what do I believe now? And I view it kind of two ways, that if you were believing in the pre-trib rapture, you were also thinking, hey, I'm going to be raptured up because the 7-year window is starting and God's going to take me out of the way. Well, for one of the reasons I don't believe that is, if you look at the Bible, there's no evidence. God does protect us and he does allow us to escape harm sometimes, but as a whole, people go through tribulation. Our whole lives are tribulations, and if you look through the Bible, everybody in it is going through some kind of tribulation or testing, from Moses to Adam to King David to Jesus to his disciples. They all had to face a tribulation as a test of their faith. Even Jesus, when he walked on water, he called to his disciples to come to him, and Peter jumped out of the boat because he felt confident in his faith. But as he walked towards Jesus, the storm clouds raged, and all of a sudden his faith weakened, and he started to sink into the water, and he had to call out to Jesus to save him. So to me, all evidence points to that, yeah, we'll be going through a tribulation, a portion of this 7-year window. So the pre-tribulation believers, I think they're faced with a decision. They have to either say, hey, I was believing not only I was going to be raptured, but that the 70th week, the 7-year window was starting, and that God was going to take me out of the way. So now that you didn't get raptured, you have to either think, okay, I didn't get raptured, but I'm now going to have to experience and live through a portion, if not all, of that 7-year window. Because the only other concept is you say, oh, well, the rapture didn't happen, but it's going to happen at some future date. Well, next year, 5 years from now, 7 years from now, 20 years from now. And thus, the 7-year 70th week, the 7-year window laid out in tribulations, wasn't about to start. That what I was believing for like the last 30 days wasn't even going to happen. That it's somewhere off in the future too. Now, I have other friends, a real close friend of mine, where he doesn't believe in a pre-trib rapture, but he's done his own calculations of numbers and whatnot, and he believes that the 70th week isn't going to happen for another 20 years. And that's why he was saying, oh, nobody's going to get raptured because we're not even starting the 70th week, those final 7 years. And they're not going to happen for another 20 years. And you know what? He may be right. But what I tell him is, I said, because, one thing I'm doing is I'm planting a stake, because I said, hey, as of September 30th, the 7-year window is now happening. And that's why I was kind of open-minded to a pre-trib rapture, even though I really didn't believe in it. I kind of said, oh, if it happens, I hope I'm scooped up. But you know what? It didn't happen. But what I was telling my other friend that thinks that, hey, the 7-year window isn't even for another 20 years, I'm like, well, what are you going to do if in the next year or so, all the events that are laid out in Revelation start happening? Are you just going to bury your head in the sand and say, oh, even though all the events are happening, according to my numbers, it doesn't happen for 20 more years. So whatever it is I'm witnessing isn't Revelations, even though it appears everything is happening, it can't be happening. And I'm like, dude, I don't know. Sounds like, I don't know how you can live in such a delusional world. Now, the one thing I know about planting a stake is, if you're wrong, it makes you look kind of foolish. Harold Camping did that. And you know what? His first stake he ever planted, he said the world was going to end in 1994. I read his book and I believed that. But you know what? The world didn't end in 1994. So I got off of the Harold Camping train. I won't get back on it again. But there's some people that believed in him, and even though he was wrong in 94, he planted another stake and they believed in that and it didn't happen. And he's planting another stake saying, oh, it's going to end in October. And that's probably not going to happen either. So I do understand the risk of planting a stake is because you could actually be wrong. So the one thing I'm going to tell you is I'm carefully monitoring the events that are happening in the world. And, from everything that I see, I think we are in that 7-year window because, the earth is going through dramatic changes. We got 6 or, half a dozen to a dozen volcanoes that are ready to blow, earthquakes happening everywhere, famine is breaking out like never before, there's flooding everywhere, there's rumors of war. Everything to me seems to be unfolding, so I'm looking for specific signs, which kind of takes us back to what happened on September 30th when we saw this alignment in the sky. And one of the conclusions I've come to is what we witnessed was not Revelations 12. And I actually believe that particular vision of a woman clothed in the sun might be happening in 2015 at the midway point of the 7-year window. And in that alignment, it'll be the sun that's in the womb of Virgo and that gets birthed. And I think it might represent Jesus coming back in all his power and glory, because that's what the sun kind of represents. But, once again, it's kind of like, what did we witness on the 30th of this year? And, that's where I get back to what to believe and what's the truth. And, Satan has a way of creating parallel events and things that look exactly like something in the Bible, but it's not exactly something in the Bible. And that's what I'm thinking we witnessed is the alignment in Virgo. It was actually Saturn and Venus that was in the womb. And Saturn is kind of known as the planet of Satan. Saturn, to the ancients, represented worldliness and accumulation of wealth and power. And I think that's what's happening in the 7-year window, is that the world is going to lose their faith, and they're basically chasing after the things that Saturn represents: worldliness, world power, earthly things. And of course, Venus, the morning star, what you'll find in the Bible is that Jesus Christ is called the morning star. And likewise, in the Bible, you'll find that Lucifer is called the morning star. So it's kind of like, which is it? Well, the way I look at it is there are things in life like guns or money or even technology where they're kind of neutral, but depending on how you use them, they could be either good or bad. Money, you could use it for good or you could use it for bad. Likewise with technology. Steve Jobs changed the world with the technology he brought forth, but I did my video blog on Tribulation 515 2011 saying, hey, yeah, he changed the world, but did he change it for better or for worse? Is technology helping us or hurting us? I think in a lot of ways technology is hurting us. And likewise, even money, when you look at the full balance, the scales of it, money's being used more for evil than for good. So anyway, I think what we witnessed on the 30th was an event that almost parallels what's in Revelations 12. But to me, since Saturn was in the womb, kind of representing Satan and worldliness, Venus represented Lucifer, not Christ. And it was Venus that dropped out of the womb, so I'm taking it as a signal that the Antichrist is being born here on earth, or being let loose, and it would match up with what's happening with the 7-year window of the final week, the 70th week. And, just so you know, I don't view it as a physical birthing, so it's not as though there's some baby born somewhere that we have to wait 30 years for it to grow up. No, this is spiritual, that if anything, it's a possession, that Satan is going to possess somebody that already exists here on earth. So I think events are going to unfold in the next, couple of months, years, where we'll see the Antichrist, taking control. And likewise, even in 2015, where the sun is going to be in the same constellation and be birthed, the second coming of Jesus, he's not coming back to earth to live a second life, so we don't have to wait for him to be 30 years old. It's a spiritual birth, where Jesus is coming in all power and glory. So, once again, people that say, oh, if somebody's being born, then we got to wait 30 years for something to happen. No, not at all. It's not happening that way. But what it does mean is if we're looking at that 7-year window, we got to start looking at the events lining up. So, there are the first 4 seals